My priest buddies and I are reading together a book called Glittering Vices by Rebecca DeYoung. Glittering Vices. It's a provocative title, and the author makes the case that if we're going to be truly happy and fulfilled, we have to live a life of virtue. And the way to live a life of virtue, which is putting on the appearance of Christ is ultimate virtue, is to identify our vices. What are the particular deadly sins or the bad traits? What are the vices that have hooks in us that prevent us from living virtuously and living ultimately fulfilled? Is it anger or lust? Is it pride, envy, any other vices, laziness, so forth? So the virtue / vice that's on display at the baptism of the Lord is, in my mind, the virtue of magnanimity. Magnanimity. And the contrasting vice is pusillanimity. Pusillanimity. And I'll explain what these are in just a second. Now, identifying, again, our vices help us to eradicate them, or at least invite God's grace into our souls to remove these vices and live the path of freedom and true joy. By the way, this is why the sacrament of reconciliation is really, really important for Catholics. It's a periodic, frequent taking stock of, okay, these are the vices that are really kind of starting to snag me down, and to have the grace to have them removed. So magnanimity is bold generosity. Think of someone who's heroic in their outward gestures of love and gentle correction, authority, someone that doesn't back down from the right thing to do outwardly, whether it's a parent who's magnanimous, helping their child, or again, correcting their child, showing them the way. A neighbor who's magnanimous goes out of their way to help their elderly neighbor, maybe do grocery shopping, or introduce a fallen family member back to the faith, back to the church, and maybe even defend the church. Not out of pride or fear, but because your heart is large, magnanimous heart, that you want what's best for that individual. You're willing to go to any lengths, even if it means you being humiliated or maybe being unpopular. Whereas the pusillanimous individual, small-hearted, is ruled by fear, by insecurity, self-doubt, and hides in the shadows, doesn't throw themselves out there into the deep, doesn't take the risk, but just cowers alone and just lets things go on as they are, whether it's with your family or the world, society, whatever. Now, I say magnanimity is on display in these readings, especially the baptism of the Lord, because we have these icons of bold characters. Look at Peter in the second reading of Acts of the Apostles. He goes and he literally preaches a sermon in this guy Cornelius' house. Now, that might just seem, okay, whatever. But it's actually a big deal. Cornelius was a Roman centurion. He was a pagan living in Jerusalem. And Peter's inspired by God to preach the message of Jesus Christ in this fellow's household. Now, keep in mind also, we're in Acts chapter 10. At this point, Stephen has been martyred already. Stephen's the first martyr, killed by Saul, and he's stoned to death by the other Jews. So the Christians are being persecuted now. They're having to live and worship clandestinely in Jerusalem. So for Peter to go outward, again, into a non-Christian's home and preach this message is pretty bold, pretty courageous. And he does it not just to, stand up to the Jewish people that are trying to persecute him, but he's doing it because of Cornelius. He wants what's best for Cornelius. Peter's magnanimous. Cornelius also, interestingly, I said he's a Roman soldier, he's a pagan, but he's actually started to believe prior to this encounter with Peter, he's starting to believe in the Jewish God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, he hasn't converted to Judaism, But he's starting to turn away from the pagan multiple gods and see the truth in the one God. So that's also a cause for magnanimity in Peter. Peter's going to show up and say, yeah, you're on the right track, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, one God. But now I'm going to throw a little wrench in your system. You got to also believe in Jesus Christ as God, the Son of God. Doesn't mean he's not a separate God. We're not multiple gods again. But and then Peter goes on to explain about Jesus. But that could have confused Cornelius. It could have angered Cornelius. Like, hey, I thought I'm on the right path, and now you're throwing this other thing at me. Peter doesn't back down. It's a difficult message he's got to preach, but he's got the virtue given from God of magnanimity. He's not pusillanimous. Look at John the Baptist, obviously. John the Baptist is a strong figure. I'm strong, but one mightier than I is coming, whose sandals I'm not worthy to untie. One mightier than I. And then look at when Jesus comes up out of the waters, the heavens are torn open. That's what the Gospel of Mark says specifically. The heavens are torn open, and the voice of the Father speaks. Tearing open. That's almost a violent gesture. There's nothing pusillanimous about tearing open. Think of when the blinds are torn open in the morning and the sunlight comes in, waking the person up. Right? They're jolted into action. Like when the seminarians are sleeping in, I got to come into the rooms and tear open the blinds to wake them up for Mass. No, I'm just kidding. They do that for me. When Jesus died on the cross at Calvary, there was curtains in the temple of Jerusalem, and those curtains, or that veil, was torn in half because Jesus was God, and he had just died, and he now was the new temple. When blasphemy was committed, the high priest would tear his garments, or the rabbis would tear their garments. Caiaphas does this in front of Jesus. When Jesus says, look, I am God, I'm the Son of God, Caiaphas tears his garments. Something bold is happening. Now, they think it's a blasphemy, but we obviously know it's the truth. So the heavens tear open to show, yes, Jesus, my magnanimous Son, is going to inaugurate the redemption here. So we are called to be magnanimous, not just to keep our faith isolated in our homes and just go about our spiritual lives, but we're called by Jesus to help him, to cooperate with him in redeeming the world. Showing our children the faith, showing our neighbors the faith, bringing peace and justice to the world. How do we do this? Well, it's eradicating pusillanimity, that vice that says, oh, you're going to fail, or you're not smart enough to do this, or you're weak enough, no one likes you. Just stay alone in your basement and keep watching Netflix. Don't go out there, right? You're going to be a mess. That's the voice of the enemy, trying to prevent us from being magnanimous to help better the world and the church. Whereas if we're going to remove that vice and focus on that virtue, we need to hear instead the voice of the Father speak to us. Speak to us the same words that he spoke to Jesus at the baptism. Notice in the Gospel of Mark, the voice of the Father says, you are my beloved Son, with you I'm well pleased. Versus at the Transfiguration, the Father also is going to speak from heaven, but he's going to say, this is my beloved Son, with whom I'm well pleased. It's more of a generic statement, whereas here at the baptism, it's you. You are my beloved Son, Jesus. Now all of us who are baptized into Christ receive the same voice, the same message from the Father. You listening to this, you sitting out there in church, you Mary, you Bob, you Joe, you Jill, you are my beloved son and daughter. I'm with you always. I love you. I've called you to this world into action, and I will give you the grace you need, and I will never let you down. That's what the Father is saying to each one of us. That's our security blanket, to be magnanimous, to have that confidence, to have pusillanimity go away from us, and for us to be Christ's to everyone else in this world and help him redeem it. Amen.